So taking those two little factoids, a higher price of labor and a lower price of natural resources due to demand and supply of labor and of natural resources, leads to the conclusion that what we're going to see in the United States, and what we did in fact see, is the substitution of energy-using machinery for labor. So we had machines that sucked up lots and lots of energy, and that gets those ratios back into equilibrium, which is what we would expect a profit-maximizing business to do. So when we look at what we were producing, Table 5, very interesting shifts between the antebellum and the postbellum period. Census of Manufacturers goes through and looks at what's the total value added by industry. It does it not just for those 9 industries that I referred to in Table 3, but it does it for lots, I don't know, dozens upon dozens of different industries. The top 5 industries in 1790 and 1860 were the same. So the rank ordering from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in both 1790 and 1860 were exactly the same. So the economy was expanding over the antebellum period between 1790 and 1860, but we weren't really changing the mix of what we were producing. Cotton goods was number 1, lumber was number 2, boots and shoes were number 3, flour and meal is number 4, men's clothing is number 5. By 1910, big switcheroo. Yep. Yes. The question is about the causes of the decrease in price of natural resources. It's about transportation. It's about the lower price of natural resources is about trees and how many trees there are and how easy it is to cut those trees down and burn them. It's also about coal discoveries, and so it's about increasing the supply of those resources as we migrate into western lands and other lands, and also as we begin the mining. So there's a lot of mining that's going to start taking place. Yeah. Okay, 1910. Number 1 industry in the country is machinery. That's because the key industry became machine tools, machines that are used to fix other machines. Lumber is still number 2. Printing and publishing becomes number 3. We're going to come back to printing and publishing on Tuesday, because printing and publishing number 3 is actually associated with the rise of compulsory education. So the development, the spread of education, textbooks, right? Got to print them. So the spread of education in the first part of the 20th century gives a real boost to the printing and publishing industry in the United States. Iron and steel, which is of course used to produce the machinery, and malt liquors. Don't you love that one? Malt liquors is number 5. So all of that hard industrial work, you got to go home at the end of the day and hit Henry's and get yourself some malt liquor. All right, couple of pictures. Here's a picture, early 20th century. So let me just read it to you. This plant tested engines prior to their assembly into machines. So these are machine tools. These are machines that are in this case are testing machines. So that's what we mean by, look how huge that is. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Steel mills, 1900. Here's a picture of a steel mill. Huge, expansive enterprises gushing all sorts of gook into the air. Right? So this was not a good time environmentally. We're not doing good things to the land. We're not doing good things to the air. We're not doing good things to the water. But we are producing an awful lot of stuff with high productivity. Huge factories, even though now I sort of led you to believe that huge factories are the norm, huge factories aren't the norm. Because if you look at food products, 8 employees per establishment is the average even in 1909. Printing, 12 employees per establishment. Lumber, 17. Furniture, 40. Machinery, 56. We're getting pretty large there. But when you think about really big factories, such as were depicted in that picture, it really is the steel mills. It's the primary metals where you get those particularly large factories. So industrialization does not necessarily mean a big factory where thousands of people work. Okay? So we're producing manufactured goods. We're using more and more machinery, which is run with steam power, which uses a lot of energy, which comes from natural resources, to run those machines. But not everybody who's working at these places is working in a factory with 1,000 people. I blew by a hand. Why is the number of, because this is the average number of people per establishment. So what it means, the question is why, if printing is being driven by education, and the education burst really starts 1900. So part of the answer to your question is I can't really look at 1869 and 1889 in the same thought as the effect of education, because it's just not there before about 1900. But the second piece is this is the average number of employees per establishment, so what you get is more and more printing presses. Right? So if you have increased demand, doesn't mean that each company is getting larger. It means you have more and more companies that are producing the same thing. Yeah, lots of small printing presses. Yeah, okay, same point. All right, labor markets. Table 7 on the handout from this week shows you annual earnings of industrial workers converted to $1982. So what do we see? We see that wages are increasing. Wages are increasing somewhat slowly, though. So annual rates of change around 2% in the mid-1870s to mid-1880s, around 2% again mid-1890s to 1900, lower than that in other periods. So we have increasing real wages, but those increases in real wages are relatively small compared with the increases in how much industrial output is being produced and in the presumed increases in productivity. I gave you the 1991 figure just to give you some comparison. Real earnings today, 91 was what, 30 years ago? 20 years ago. Do my math for me. 20 years ago. Real earnings today in $1982 versus 1991 is probably going to be about $17,400. So there hasn't been much progress in average real earnings of industrial workers. Is that me? Sorry. And then my cell phone went off in the middle of class. Okay, wages are usually expressed per day, so you're not getting a weekly, monthly, or annual wage. You're getting a daily wage. Typical work days, 10 to 11 hours per day, more in the southern textile mills, and typically 7 days a week in those steel mills, because you can't turn that machinery off. So that machinery, if you get that blast furnace up to 2,000 degrees, you got to keep working that blast furnace and keep it at 2,000 degrees. You're not going to have a shift that takes off and takes Sunday off when it takes so much effort to get that blast furnace up and functional. Most industries are almost all male. So if this is the top, I don't know what it is, top 10 or so industries ranked by what's the percentage of male workers in that industry versus what's the percentage of female workers in that industry. Notice that the top 10 on the male side, I'm still at 98% male for the top 10 industries on the male side, and I'm already at 97% female when I get to the second industry on the female side. So the male industries, blacksmith, carpentry, painting, wallpaper, shipbuilding, and so on and so forth on that side. Typically female industries, custom millinery, so making a custom dress for somebody, dressmaking but not custom, corsets, girdles. Gone with the Wind shows you corsets. Shirts. This class is actually film. Who knew? Travelogue and film. Men's accessories, millinery and lace. So I read these things and I think custom millinery, dressmaking, corsets, shirts, men's accessories, millinery and lace, hosiery, knit goods, skip boxes, women's clothing, and silk. Those are all clothing, right? Those are all textile types of products, with the exception of boxes, which is a paper goods sort of product. And when I get down to the top 10, I'm down to 57% female. So we had a very gender-specific labor force, particularly the lots and lots of occupations that were all industrial occupations were all male. Women's labor force participation. Women's labor force participation is going to be an important part of our story. The rise in women's labor force participation will be an important part of our story in the post-World War II part of the course. What we see in this part of the course is not so much of an increase over time in participation, but a huge difference in participation rates between the white population and the non-white population. It's called non-white at the time because that's what the census categories were. So we have to go with how did the census ask the question in 1890, 1900, 1920. The racial categories they used in 1890, 1900, 1920 were white and non-white. So that's what we've got. But you can see there the huge difference between the typical labor force participation of white women and of non-white women, a third to a little less than a half where do I want to go with this? I want to go over here. About a quarter, there we go, a quarter to a third of non-white married women are in the labor force versus well less than 10% of white married women are in the labor force. The changes that we'll see, just sort of previewing for you what we'll see, the changes that we'll see in the post-World War II period are going to be largely in this married white women category. So that's just a little preview of what we're going to do in about 5 weeks. Is we're going to see a closing of this racial gap, particularly for married women in the post-World War II period. Women's wages about 60% of men's wages in the 1920s. Lots of legislation. It's covered in the textbook. I'm not going to spend any time on it beyond the slide. Lots of labor legislation that comes about in this progressive era. If you've taken history classes, you've talked about it there. The question is this protection or is this limiting? Is the goal of the labor legislation to protect children? So do we have compulsory school laws in order to protect the children from being exploited in the labor force? Or do we have that as a way of lowering the labor supply of children so as to increase the wages of the adults? Same with protection, labor protection that was geared towards women. Is this a way of protecting women or is this a way of getting women out of the labor force and thereby increasing the wages of men? So, and I'm not going to, that's it, that's all I'm going to say. Next, banking. All right, new topic. So what's our context? Our context is we're talking about economic growth. You three, my friends here, thank you. I know it's beautiful weather outside. I'll get you out there in 38 minutes. But until then, let's pretend we're all together here. All right, banking. All right, draw a big line, new subject. This is one of the subjects, once again, that's part of those rises in total factor productivity, right? So we've got various things we've looked at, transportation, finance, that are part of increasing total factor productivity. That are, in banking in particular, it's about how do we channel funds from savers to investors? How do we do the financing of business and, in this period, of farming? Really interesting aspects of banking in this period. I'm skipping over stuff that's in the book. I assigned it, but I didn't mean to. So there was stuff in the book I assigned on bimetallism and coinage, and whether it's gold or silver, and I didn't mean to. I'm not going to talk about it. So there you go. Crime of 73, all that good stuff. Yeah, I'm skipping that. All right, where I'm starting, I'll give you the brief overview. There's this movie called The Wizard of Oz, and it's all about gold versus silver. And that there was a time period when the money in the United States was backed by some sort of metal, be it gold or silver. There was times when it was backed by both gold and silver. There were times when the official rates of exchange between dollars and gold and dollars and silver were screwed up so that it was effectively backed only by gold because they had the ratios wrong in the government as opposed to the market. During the Civil War, there was a need to have lots of money on the part of the Union, which is the North, in order to pay goods. And so at that point, there's an issuance of currency, paper currency, that's not backed by gold or silver. It's just backed by the green paper that it's printed on, and that's why it's called greenbacks. The people didn't like the fact that they were greenbacks because it wasn't backed by gold and silver, and they thought gold and silver was somehow better money than greenbacks. And so the greenbacks were eventually retired. We go back on a de facto gold standard, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to talk about it. There you go. All right, what I am going to talk about is the National Banking Acts. 1863 and 1864, there's two National Bank Acts. I don't know which of these 5 provisions I'm going to show you is in 1863 and which one is in 1864. If I don't know, do you need to know? Thank you. All right. The key point here is that 1863 and 1864 are both during the Civil War. Who's not in Congress during the Civil War? The South. So the South has seceded from the Union. They're not in Congress. There's a bunch of stuff that gets passed. So we talked about the Homestead Act the other day. We're going to talk about banking today. On Tuesday, I'll talk about the establishment of universities, so the Moral Land Grant Act that establishes public universities, like the University of California at Berkeley, for instance. But today we're doing banking. So 1863 and 1864, there are a couple of acts that are passed by Congress. Remember back to when we talked about banking in the antebellum period, and the problem going into 1860-ish was that each of the individual banks that existed in the United States could issue its own currency. That each state was chartering banks. It was the free banking era. Remember, it was 1836 to 1864, so it ends with these National Bank Acts. The free banking era refers to the fact that individuals who wanted to open a bank no longer had to grease the palms, bribe. Particular legislators could get an act of their state legislature to say, yes, you can open a bank. They just had to check off some bureaucratic boxes to make sure they met particular provisions, and then they could open a bank. We wound up by the 1860-ish with 1,500 different banks in the United States. Each of these banks were issuing their own currency. That currency, remember, did not trade at par. So if you had a $5 note from a bank in South Carolina and you took that $5 note to a business in Philadelphia, you were unlikely to get $5 for that note. The absence of a currency that circulated at par, that means that circulated at the value that was printed on the bill, was hampering trade. It was hampering a whole lot of things, but it was hampering trade in particular because if you don't know whether a $5 bill is worth $5 or $4 or $3 or $2 or $1, that's just too dang much uncertainty. So the absence of some sort of standard currency was really messing up the economy. There had been a push in Congress to solve this by coming up with some sort of federal rules around banking. The Southerners, states' rights people, the Southerners didn't want there to be a federal solution to the banking problem because they believe in states' rights. Same argument. You hear the same thing today, right? Marriage is coming up before the Supreme Court sometime next month. You hear the same states' rights arguments today. States' rights. When we went to Mount Rushmore, which is in Travelog. Travelog. So Mount Rushmore, which is in South Dakota. That's where the presidents are carved into the stone, right? And we went there. When did we go there? It was a long time ago. 86, we went to Mount Rushmore. Oops. 86, we went to Mount Rushmore. And, you go to the little park ranger presentation, yeah. So we go down. It was after dark. They were going to light up the Mount Rushmore. The rangers there. They got the fire going. You're singing the camp songs, all that kind of stuff. The park ranger that was doing the presentation was from the South. So he was talking about who the various presidents were and why they were important and why they were on Mount Rushmore. And all he said about Abraham Lincoln was about states' rights versus federal rights and preserving the Union over states' rights. And I looked at my partner who's from Kentucky and I said, wasn't there something about like slavery and freeing the slaves in there too? She says, not when you're from the South. Oh, okay. So the states' rights part was really important and prevented the Congress from coming to any sort of compromise over banking, as well as all these other things that we talked about. So what do they do? 1863 and 1864. They need some sort of national currency to facilitate trade. They're worried about the fact that they've got all of these banks that have been authorized by the state, by the various states, and that some of those banks are just crazy. I mean, some of these are like people who are going in, starting a bank, taking deposits, and taking off and running. And it's undermining people's confidence in the banking system generally. And they need some way to finance the Civil War. So all three of those goals, coming up with some way of facilitating trade through having a national currency, getting an end to what's called the wildcat banking, so the insanity of having all of these different banks with different sets of rules, some of which were pretty sloppy, and coming up with finance for Civil War. All of these three goals lead to the National Bank Act. So you have your hand up. Yeah. So states' rights in this context means not having federal rules that govern how banks in a particular state will behave. So letting each individual state set its own rules for how the banks in its state will behave. And what are the rules for how much financial capital they have to start a bank, and what are the rules for who they can lend to, and you'll see some details in just a second. Okay, so first provision, banks can obtain a federal charter. So at this point, before the National Bank Act, there was no way for a bank to get a federal charter. Banks could get a state charter, but they couldn't get a federal charter. This creates a new category of banks that are called national banks. It's important to recognize that national banks are not nationwide banking. So right now, the Bank of America, you can go practically any place in the country and find a Bank of America ATM. Now we have nationwide banking. But national banks doesn't mean nationwide banking. The banks are still operating each in only one state, so there's no interstate banking at this point. We don't get interstate banking until 1980s, 1990s, I forget. Relatively recent. That's why we used to have traveler's checks, because you couldn't get money out of your bank once you left your state. Okay, so banks can get a federal charter. When they get a federal charter, they'll be called a national bank, but it doesn't mean there's nationwide bank. It doesn't mean a bank can operate in more than one state. We got that? I'm good? Okay, 2. Only national banks can issue national bank notes, and those national bank notes must circulate at par. So if it says $5 on it, everybody has to be willing to honor that as worth $5. You can't say, well, I don't know where that national bank note comes from. I'm only going to give you $4 for a $5 note. You can't discount national bank notes. They have to circulate at par. That's part of solving the problem in terms of trade, having a currency that by law has to circulate at par. Now, at this point, they still have both the national banks and the state banks. So if there's a group of 5 people who want to start a bank, they can choose. Do I want a charter from my state, or do I want a charter from the federal government? Do I want to be a state bank, or do I want to be a national bank? And if these 5 people who started a bank decide they want to be a state bank, they can still issue those state bank notes, which had the problem, of course, that they didn't all, in fact, they didn't, period, circulate at par. So third provision, tax the state bank notes. If you are a group of people who own a bank, and you have a state charter, and you have issued currency, like I showed you the currency the other day when we did banking, and you have issued currency from your bank, you have to pay a tax equal to 2% of the total value of the notes that you've issued. So you have a bank, you own a bank, your bank has issued $1,000 worth of currency, you got to pay 2% of that. $20, right? $20 annually, every year. You got to pay $20. Yep. No state bank notes. So this is only if you're a state bank. So because the problem is they want to get rid of the state banks, right? So they're going to try to create an economic incentive for states not to issue these bank notes anymore. So if you're a group of people who own a bank, who have a state charter, and you've issued these bank notes that are just state bank notes from a state bank, then you have to pay a tax to the federal government every year that's equal to 2% of the total value of the bank notes that your bank has issued. 2% is supposed to be a level of tax that discourages banks from issuing state bank notes. 2% turns out to be pretty small. And so less than a year later, they increase the tax to 10%. That takes care of it. Because that means if you've issued $1,000 worth of currency, doesn't matter whether it's in your vault or in circulation, if you've issued $1,000 worth of currency, you're paying $100 a year to the government. Yeah. Oh. So that pretty much gets rid of the state bank notes. So here's the state bank notes in circulation. Weird picture. I didn't take time to redraw the graph. It's the one and only 3-dimensional graph you'll see all semester was an experiment. And so here we are, 1860, and shoo. And so the tax, putting in the tax, the 10% tax eliminates the amount of state bank notes that are in circulation. But these are in thousands of dollars, so it had peaked at about $240 million worth of state bank notes that were in circulation, 1863, before these national bank acts are put into place. The National Bank Act, the national bank notes, these are really cool. So I want you to get the lights. I found these. You could have found these yourself, but I found them for you. Just Google images, national bank notes. So the national bank notes. Hello. National bank notes say national currency. This note is secured by bonds of the United States deposited with the U.S. Treasurer at Washington, which means Washington, D.C. Okay? This is a $5 note. It's still going to tell you which bank is issuing it. Notice it's a national bank. So Everett, Boston National Bank. So it has a charter from the federal government that makes it a national bank. It doesn't mean that it operates any place other than Boston, Massachusetts. It's just that its permission to operate came from the federal government and not from the Massachusetts Commonwealth. This one was issued in September of 1865, based here it is on an act approved June something, 1864. I love these pictures. I don't know what they're doing. Looks like they're on the side of a ship, and he's pointing and he's praying, and he's sick to his stomach. I don't know what they're doing. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure it's got some Disneyland connection. So here's 1900, $5 bill. So I think these are all $5, right? So that's kind of a cool picture. By 1900, the currency has presidents on it. Which one is that? I don't know. National currency. This note is secured by bonds of the United States or other. It's not Lincoln. It's Grant. Okay. All right. This one's issued by the Western National Bank of San Francisco. We'll pay the bearer on demand $5. So it's still telling you where it's issued, but it says national currency at the top. And because it says national currency at the top, it has to be honored for $5. So nobody can give you less than $5 for it. Here's another one. This one, at least they now tell me who it is. That's Benjamin Harrison. So we're like migrating through presidents. I'm not sure how they made the decision who was on which bill. Still $5 though. United States national currency, United States of America, First National Bank of Fort Myers.